And I was looking at the time and thinking, oh gosh, I wish we had 2 hours for this session, for the debate on this session, because it's so dense, it's so packed. But and I see hands already, so I don't even have a chance to say anything. But it was a very interesting thing between city making as a social process, not prescriptive guidelines, but sort of typological taxonomies, design for placemaking, best practices, patterns. So let's see if we can get through the maze. Fred is waving there. So Fred, you will get the first word. And please raise your hand and the microphones will go to you. Good. Okay.
A question for Vikas. Interesting work. Were you able to get any demographic? I mean, one of the things we've been trying to grapple with is how we measure how inclusive streets are. So interesting for people from different backgrounds, whether they feel welcome or included in a street or in a public space. I'd be really interested to hear if you've explored anything in that area in your research.
To measure how inclusive streets are?
I think some streets feel more welcoming for certain citizens, others would feel more threatening. So that's one thing I've been grappling with, is how do you measure a sense of inclusive? I feel included here, I feel welcome here.
So this is an area of research that we have a 3-year research project in communication. And the notion is really taking this idea of what does the environment communicate to different people? And the question is, in fact, perhaps very similar to what you're asking. How does that place become either welcoming or not, or somewhere in between? It doesn't have to be one or the other. How does the environment, with what it does in terms of its design, management, convey, and how does it communicate? So I don't have an answer to that, but that's a question I have. What I showed here was that there were some environments in some locations that were more inclusive. And there's probably some way to tease out a little bit from this why they were more inclusive. We can get into that a little bit, but that was not the main question. But that is going to be the main question of my project, which is for the next 3 years.
Could I come back on that as well to Peter? Because I'm not sure how the question of how people feel is maybe should be the central focus. And thinking about inclusionary spaces may be better phrased in terms of thinking about non-exclusionary spaces. Are people allowed to be in the space? Are they allowed to sit down? Are they allowed to lie down if they want to? Do they have to pay? Do they have to consume? People could be feeling terrible for all kinds of reasons. But the affordances of space, I think, can be measured. I agreed with the point you said about safety. Often we take crime rates as being an indicator of better or worse spaces. I don't think crime rates are always an indicator that a space isn't working. Homicide rates maybe, but crime rates more generally can show a space is well used. There are many different kinds of people, and there are trade-offs between relative degrees of safety and of vitality.
So this notion that many of you might be familiar with about behavior settings, where the idea that we can create sort of physical settings that will not guarantee behavior, but that are now designed through the study of behaviors. That if that behavior is desired, that the space will support it, afford it, the affordances idea. So I think that's as much as we would want to go in terms of being how deterministic space can be. But that question has become even more complex in the multicultural city. Behavior settings are different for different people now, and there are so many different peoples. So this idea of multiple publics has only made this question more interesting and more complex.
Thank you. We have 2. I don't want to hinder the next section, so Harrison, and I know I cut you off in the last one, so I'll see if I can squeeze you in. I can't promise. 2 more here.
Good afternoon. My question is for Vikas, sir. So, I mean, firstly, just commenting on your presentation, personally, I found it much more significant because it was backed up with certain of your studies, and then the conclusions were made. So there was a kind of, it had a strong base to really bring those conclusions rather than just generalizing it. But there was a slide in which you showed some streets from Mumbai. So, I mean, the question which, I mean, I really would like you to comment how you see, I mean, generally the case is there is no segregation of segregation of activities on a street generally across the cities in India. I mean, there are hardly any. So, I mean, what happens in the end is, like, although it is called a footpath, but people end up walking on the carriageways, and the footpath is used for the vendors. So, and there is obviously a policy as well, like there is an urban design street policy for the vendors, which is actually, which define the hawkers not as hawkers, but informal settlements or the informal vendors. So they have a term, and they have been allotted officially those spaces. But still, like, how would you comment in the cases wherein the footpath itself is not wide enough to really accommodate hawkers or vendors as well as the pedestrians? And there has to be a minimum available carriageway as well. So there are many such cases across the cities. So how do you do that?
So first thing, the photographs are from one street in Delhi. I'm particularly interested in looking at an environment and not a collection of photographs. And I will belabor that point, because we often collect things and think that we can pick up things and make this case. That's actually not particularly useful. So those pictures that I showed were only from one street in Delhi. And the answer to your more substantive question is really that there is the idea of local negotiation and local controls. Certainly, in most streets in India, there is never enough space. And they are not equal spaces. There are winners and losers, even in that local negotiated space. But the point is that the winners and losers are often not the same. When we are controlling space from top down, we find the winners are usually the same winners. The ones that have the power and the money and all of that, the corporations. But in the case in India, there are different winners and losers in different situations. So there is a little bit more self-leveling of who gets to occupy that street. Certainly, there would be policies that could talk about widening sidewalks, taking away more space from vehicles, and nobody would probably, at least none of us, would disagree. But I think there is this self-negotiated order, if you will, that is perhaps more equal than a top-down that we see often.
Okay, I heard that you can steal a car in 60 seconds. So 60-second question, 60-second answer.
Okay.
I try to be quick, but I won't make 60 seconds. I thought all the three presentations were actually emotional, and they were cautiously emotional. And I wanted to get back to your friend, your argument. You need an economic argument to win the social one. And I think this is very disturbing. This is really something we should really think about. We have created with our economic arguments, we have created the threefold crisis: economically, environmentally, socially. The world is not going to be a better place. The big elephant in the room is actually private space, where we talk about public space. And we're talking about world economies that drive us crazy. So, and then we say, as academics, as people that are not paid by any consultant, we tell we need an economic argument to win the social one. And maybe we should turn that around, because we are talking also, we are talking about advising member states. Of the UN system is member states. So what are the member states for? Do they serve our economy? And I know it sounds incredibly naive or incredibly revolutionary, but I think we have to make that point once in a while. That our economic arguments towards those member states are the wrong ones. The member states are to serve the people have to be satisfied by the needs and by satisfying their needs. And that is in public space, that is in the cities. We need to build cities for the people and not for the economies. So I would really try to turn it a bit around. And the national policies you mentioned for the design, we have so many ideas and creativities. We have so many diversities. So it would be actually quite easy if we try to start with a social argument first. Thanks.
Okay. Please short, if all of you, or if you want to respond.
Thank you for the comment. I think that we do though need to break down the notion of what an economic argument is, because too often in these contexts it's about making very high-level economic arguments about attracting industry, attracting inward investment, and so on. Economic arguments are also about livelihoods at all kinds of levels, and cities do provide the basis for tens and hundreds and thousands and millions of livelihoods, depending on which context you're talking about. So I wouldn't want to simply evacuate the economic arguments, but I agree with you that it should be about the everyday economic lives of the city. And that was the point I was trying to finish with, that these social commitments are political value positions in the end. I don't think the arguments that can be won by recourse to evidence. How upfront activists can be about that is a different question in different kinds of contexts. But that's where it's coming from.
Just
30 seconds.
come back on that, I don't think you can separate the economic from the social, and actually, whilst you're making those high-level arguments, I think they need to be backed up by the emotional stories that really do sell the case for good design and better quality places. So.
Thank you very much. I'll have to draw the line. Sorry, Harrison. Now we have the two sessions that are very important, the City We Need debate and the closing sessions. Just before I give the word to Thomas, I would like to thank, which I forgot to thank, our rapporteurs, which you have seen. There's a group of very young, diligent people taking notes of all the sessions. So that was very important. A little applause for them. And then a huge round of applause for our three wonderful speakers in this last session.